Hey guys, me and Buster Green here. Please like and subscribe. So, welcome back to another episode of the Best Episode Ever, a series in where I usually highlight a series that ran for hundreds of episodes and point out in what my opinion is the best single episode of that series. Although this time I'm mixing things up a little bit. So today I'm going to cover Xam'd, The Lost Memories, a pretty average size but below average quality anime from the distant year of 2008. Xam'd was an anime that had intense promise. You see, Xam'd is Studio Bones' follow-up anime after the successful and legendary first season of Eureka 7. It has a lot of the same DNA as Eureka 7, it has a lot of the same crew, and it promised to have a lot of the same cool shit that made Eureka 7 work, only completely new and completely different. So we have a ship full of misfits who deliver mail in a fantasy world that strongly resembles modern Japan, but is different enough to be its own thing, while also stuck in the middle of a strange Gundam-like war and having to deal with larger-than-life humanoid mutations called Xam'd, a race of strange monsters, originally human beings, mutated from coming into contact with strange stones, which in the main character's case is embedded in his skin after a terrorist explosion. All the characters are pretty cool and original, and the show has some really interesting mysteries, while also being a vague analogy for the post-9/11 war on terror. So, the series was produced and paid for by Sony, which leads to a very weird publicity stunt that the only way you could watch the show if it was 2008 was if you owned a PS3 and you watched the show on the PlayStation Network. Xam'd was the first PlayStation Network exclusive anime ever made, and to my knowledge, the only one. So, with no use in being a hardcore Eureka 7 fan, I watched it on PS3, and doing so, I got this amazing collectible Xam'd PS3 theme skin, which I rocked out for like a couple of good years. Sony really hyped up this anime, and there was a lot of goodwill going into it because Eureka 7 was just a perfect anime. Bones was on a hot winning streak back then and had made a lot of really decent anime, and I don't think making this anime PSN exclusive hurt the quality of the anime at all while it was being developed, but it definitely hurt the reception of the anime in terms of it finding an audience, and years later it accelerated the way that Xam'd just kind of vanished into the ether after the fact, especially because it wasn't that good of a show, and seriously, are you going to dust off your PS3 just to watch an old episode of Xam'd? Though it wasn't all terrible. If I'm being completely real, Xam'd, even though it's a below average anime for Studio Bones, I have to praise the fact that it has one of the most epic soundtracks ever. The soundtrack was orchestrated by Godzilla, Fullmetal Alchemist, and Zelda Twilight Princess composer Michiru Oshima, and Xam'd is literally some of the best work of her entire career. And it's a real shame that this anime sucks, because this is honestly one of those animes that is worse than its beautiful, perfect soundtrack. Hell, if you want to watch the anime just for kicks, it's worth watching just to zone out to the epic visuals and the peaceful, beautiful, perfect music that plays throughout them. So Xam'd has a pretty nice kick-ass opening that is kind of like punk rock and surfer in the same way that Eureka 7 was. But despite those few good points, the average episode of Xam'd is pretty goddamn bad. Every episode consists of the main character Akiyuki, who, after being corrupted into a monster after a terrorist attack, is slowly mutating into this monstrous creature called a Xam'd, and every time he is forced into using his Xam'd powers, he gets super strong, but he also gets brain damage. Now, as a result of that, he's basically a teenager with early onset Alzheimer's disease. He's in love with this average anime girl named Haru, who loves him back at first, but Haru totally sucks and only gets progressively evil as the show goes along. She joins in with the bad guy army, and she's kind of like Katajina from Gundam. And if I remember right, at some point she's trying to kill him. Like in the choice between the man she loves and the government trying to kill him, she always irrationally sides with the government, and that just makes me wonder if she even really loved him at all. Or she loved him until, he was a problem for her. So she comes off as kind of a flaky bitch. And meanwhile, he's being bossed around by this magical native girl named Nakayami, who's kind of a ripoff of Nausicaa. She's got the glider, she's got the facial tattoos. Nakayami should be his true love interest, but they really don't get along because she has these mysterious, unclear goals, and they really just don't communicate with each other properly. Like, it seems like she wants to take care of him, but maybe she also just wants to use him as a monster, because when he turns into a monster, she pretty much becomes his Pokemon trainer. And meanwhile, the main character, Akiyuki, is unfortunately a really lackluster protagonist. He's one of those, bland, unclear protagonists who really doesn't have any agency for himself. And he takes this really depressive, passive-aggressive stance into his whole hideous and brain-damaging transformation into a monster. Now, I forget if his situation was totally hopeless, but he has this real, well, if I'm going to become a mindless animal, then who cares attitude. And if not for Nakayami taking care of him constantly and rescuing him from various situations, he definitely would have died a billion times over in the course of this anime. This is made all the more frustrating by the ongoing underground theme of self-realization that this anime is very preachy about, and the constant fact that if Akiyuki does not fully and clearly acknowledge himself as a human and remember who he is, then he will literally at any point become a monster forever. Like, every episode of Xam'd has this theme of you need to 100% acknowledge yourself, be true to yourself, accept that you're a human, otherwise you're a monster. And yeah, I get that, that's definitely true. Have you ever seen what people who don't accept their humanity act like? Yeah. Anyway, like I said before, the average episode of Xam'd is pretty frustrating. It doesn't even have a good ending for a series. So I really can't recommend you to watch the entire show because the ending barely clarifies anything, and it really doesn't resolve any of the show's core conflicts. If I had to grade every individual episode of Xam'd, I'd have to give probably all of them a 2 or a 3 at best, just because of how overall disappointing they are. But despite that, there is one standalone episode of Xam'd which I think you should watch. A single episode that's a 10 out of 10. And if I ever go back to watch the series, it's the only episode I ever bother to watch, because the rest are too boring. There is a single episode that fully encompasses all the potential that Xam'd ever could have had and ever could have been. And the best episode of Xam'd is episode 14, Cerulean Skies. Episode 14 starts off with a desaturated flashback to peaceful high school times between Haru and Furuichi, practicing play lines for a play they're putting on in the high school cultural festival. I noticed Akiyuki is in this flashback, and he's much more lively and fun in this flashback than he ever is in the entire anime. And the music here, my god, the music here. The music here says more about these characters than the dialogue can ever hope to do. It perfectly establishes the love triangle between Haru, Akiyuki, and Furuichi, and it also establishes that in the past, Furuichi was too timid a guy to act on his love for Haru, and he kind of just let her get away from him. And then we get a perfect transition to modern times, where Furuichi is now turning into a Xam'd and has taken Haru as his hostage. Furuichi reveals that in the terrorist attack in the first episode that turned Akiyuki into a Xam'd, Furuichi was also turned into a Xam'd, and he has a piece of monster shrapnel in his leg that is mutating him too. Furuichi describes the Xam'd as his shadow come to the surface, that it has freed him from his previous timid nature. Furuichi embraces his Xam'd and begins mutating more and more into a monster. He fully mutates into a full-size monster very quickly. Nakayami is there, and Nakayami is offended by Furuichi embracing his monster nature. And they try to get Haru away from him, but Furuichi, meanwhile, just is full-on a monster now. He's been consumed by his base jealousy, and he wants to kill his best friend Akiyuki to end the status quo of the love triangle between the three of them. Furuichi continues mutating more and more, and Nakayami explains that the monster inside of Furuichi is full of hate, and that Furuichi is also full of hate, and the natural hate that the both of them share is feeding each other. She tries to make a deal with Furuichi to try and preserve his humanity, but he's not having it, and he knocks her out. Furuichi and Akiyuki declare themselves as enemies, and they begin fighting at this point. This fucking episode has the best animation in the entire series. They went so all out on animating Monster Furuichi, And the way he grotesquely mutates back and forth throughout this episode is completely mesmerizing. I cannot take my eyes off this fucking animation. It's the best fucking animation in the goddamn entire series. Haru tells Furuichi that she loves Akiyuki and not him, and they have a massive argument. During this time, she's really cruel to him, and if you pause the video right here, you can literally see the point where his heart breaks in half. Unfortunately, even if you're in an abusive love triangle, you need to be civil about it. Anyway, she breaks his heart, and Furuichi just mutates further and further based on all this stressful trauma. He grows these bug eyes, and he ends up eating Haru because he's so pissed off with her. So the two Xam'd resume fighting at this point, but apparently even though Furuichi looks like a creepy giant monster, and he has this horrible purple skin, his skin actually has the consistency of a bowl of jello, and Haru literally manages to swim out of Furuichi's gooey monster skin and back to the surface where she can breathe. So this time around, she tries to be a little bit nicer to him, and the three of them get into this very weird argument, vaguely based on their high school play, about which one of them is the light one, which one of them is the dark one, the duality of shadow and lightness. Akiyuki transformed into a Xam'd after this, being pushed too far by all this fucking chaos. Furuichi declares that he has to kill him now because that's the only way he can end the status quo and improve his life. He cannot stand being inferior to Akiyuki. Akiyuki transforms and starts shredding Monster Furuichi apart. Because again, even though he's big, he's not strong. He's not stronger than a human being. He's just bigger. Furuichi tries to run off with Haru and cries about how everything sucks. Nakayami acts as Akiyuki's Pokemon trainer again at this point and forces him to beat the shit out of Furuichi. Every punch Akiyuki delivers causes him to swell into these extremely painful cancer-like tumors. And eventually it's just so pathetic that Akiyuki can't punch him anymore. He just stops. Nakayami comments that his hatred is the only thing that saved his life from being consumed by the monster. And then she restores him back to being a normal human being for medicine. Furuichi and Haru are back to normal suddenly, and Furuichi says he feels completely refreshed having confessed his feelings to her. Haru cries and says that if they just try hard enough, they can go back to their old lives, like back when they were in high school. And Furuichi just stares up and says that the sky is cerulean blue, and that's the title of this episode. Anyway, at this point the military commander shows up and he starts missiling Akiyuki with his mini mechas. The military commander declares that the Xam'd are inhuman things and a threat to public safety, and Furuichi is immediately arrested and put in gallows. He agrees to go peacefully when the commander says he won't harm Haru since she technically did nothing, and the commander is super smug about capturing Akiyuki. Haru is distressed about this, but again, she always sides with the government and she cares more about the military than she does Akiyuki. So Akiyuki and Nakayami start communicating telepathically, and he tells her to get the fuck out of here. So he grabs the commander with his Xam'd arm and she makes a run for it. Then he uses the commander as a hostage to de-escalate the situation. The commander tells his soldiers just to kill him, but they won't do it, so he gets angry and calls them all rookies. Then we do a quick cut over to the scientists who are like researching Xam'ds. Anyway, they're watching this whole scene play down on like their security cameras, and they hope that the commander and the Xam'd will talk to each other. So they do. The commander didn't know the Xam'd could talk, and he's really impressed that they can have a conversation. He explains that he knew Akiyuki's father, and Akiyuki agrees to release the commander as long as he does not hurt Haru and Furuichi. So he does, and then they say that they're not enemies, but then Akiyuki flies away and the commander flips his shit and loads a clip of bullets at him as he flies away, cursing him out, and goddamn, that commander is a two-faced liar. Anyway, so Monster Akiyuki meanwhile continues to depressingly walk down the highway, boggled down from the absolute shit of this day. He gets flanked by another one of the mass production robots who fear him, and they start shooting at him. And once again, the music is absolutely perfect. So the robot pilot freaks out when he sees Akiyuki's human arm coming out of the Xam'd, and this scares him so much that he shoots him straight off the highway into a river that washes him away. The commander screams, why would he do that? But the soldier just said he was so fucking creepy to look at. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, a police van is taking away Furuichi, and the police van passes by Furuichi's favorite local convenience store that he used to always play at as a kid. Furuichi breaks out of the police van and kills all the military police. He walks over to the old lady who's running the shop. He's known this lady for years, and he asks to buy 3 ramen sodas. The old lady says he'll get cavities if he drinks them all, and declares that he's going to split them with his 3 friends. One's for his girlfriend Haru, one's for him, and one's for his best friend. Suddenly, dozens of military police swarm on Furuichi, and he's disgusted by this. He realizes that the simple, normal, happy life he had in high school is never going to come back. And in this instance, he uses his Xam'd powers to rip off his own head. And suddenly he's dead. He's dead so fast, it takes seconds for his body to slump over dead. The old lady screams non-stop. In the epilogue of this episode, Akiyuki washes up on the edge of the water near the dock a few feet from where he was supposed to rendezvous with Nakayami and escape from town. Unfortunately, it's nighttime and she doesn't see him, so he also has been in his monster form too long, and now he can't turn his face back into a normal human face. He ends up getting captured and put on a slave train. That's how the episode ends. Now, by all accounts, in a very strange choice, this episode, episode 14, is the climax of this anime. And that's a major problem considering this is a 26 episode anime. I don't think I've ever seen an anime climax early like this, but it's undeniable that it really blew its load. I kept watching the show after this because this is the one episode that was so freaking cool that it gave me so much hope for the show, but this was the peak. It never topped this episode. I thought they might have like the same stakes by the ending or the same intensity, but nah, they never did. This one episode was just deeply private and personal and so intense that they never got back to it. Like, this episode is an absolute tragedy. This episode firmly establishes Furuichi as Akiyuki's rival, literally the only threat he would face in the entire series, and the only character strong enough to even fight him on an even footing. And what fucking happens to him? He fucking kills himself at the end of the episode. They never have a climactic battle. This is it. It's another reason that this single episode is the most epic episode of the entire show, because Jesus fucking Christ, I've never seen anime go to such lengths to establish an absolutely perfect rival for the main character that the main character cannot manage to beat, and then just kill them off when they're 100% established and finally going. Like, this would be like killing off Vegeta in season 1 of Dragon Ball Z, and then for the rest of the show, Goku just doesn't do anything because he has nothing left to do. Like, that's essentially what happens in the show. They spend the first half of this anime establishing this great personal villain who used to be the main character's best friend, the greatest fucking villain the show would ever see, and in the middle of the show, they just fucking kill him off in the episode where they finally flip the stage and make him a villain. Just when he's finally strong enough to go toe-to-toe in the hero, and it blows my mind that they fucked this show up so bad. Like, the final boss of the show is Nakayami's freaking sister that Akiyuki has nothing to do with, cares nothing about her, and on top of that, he meets her like an episode before they fight her. Like, the end of the show, Nakayami is essentially the main character, but the show starts out being about Akiyuki and Furuichi. Furuichi was Akiyuki's rival, and this episode completely encapsulates their relationship perfectly. Furuichi is the best character on the freaking show, even if he is kind of like a twisted incel villain, because he's deeply human, and the whole drama between him and Haru and Akiyuki is painfully relatable and ties into the show's overall theme of accepting humanity. Like, I'm sure you've had your heart broken, or I'm sure you've been messed up in the head when maybe your friends started dating and, you know, maybe it was someone you wished you could have dated first, but now they're dating your other friend. Like, what happened in this episode with Furuichi is so traumatic. Like, I'm really torn between the fact that he committed suicide at the end of the episode. I'm torn considering that being an intense and justified acknowledge of the loss of freedoms from the crimes he's committed, or just kind of lame because it's where the show peaked. And yet, this suicide is also the perfect fuck you ending for this episode, because they really, really did this character's entire arc in this single episode. And I'm so torn on this because it's simultaneously what makes this single episode so perfect, but it's also what makes the series as a whole so shitty. Anyway, that's the best episode of Xam'd. It just never got any better than that one. So please never lose track of that. This is reality and you are really a human being. Xam'd was a series that could have been the next Eureka 7, but it got entombed onto the PlayStation Network and no one really saw it. It eventually got released on Blu-ray and it's probably streaming somewhere if you really want to seek it out, but I'm telling you guys, there's only one good episode in Xam'd, and this was it. I'm Buster Green. Thank you for spending some time with me here today. Please subscribe. I only need 279 subscribers to get monetized. Fuck yeah. I'm out.